The
posse is
Wild
closing
West's
in. We
most
have to move
savage
now.
punishments,
It's too late for
even
running.
worse
We
than you
stand
think
and
the
fight.
land in the far
Please,
west
there
was
must be
wide,
another way. Don't do
open,
this.
and full of promise. People came from the east with wagons, families, and hope in their hearts. They believed this new land would give them a better life, more freedom, more work, and more chances to succeed. But what many of them did not understand at first was that freedom came with a heavy price. There were few rules, fewer officials, and almost no real system to protect everyone equally. In this place, survival mattered more than fairness. Small towns appeared almost overnight. A few wooden buildings, a dusty road, maybe a saloon, a store, and a place to stay the night. These towns were built quickly, often near mines, railroads, or cattle trails. People came and went, and many of them were strangers to one another. Trust was rare. Everyone watched everyone else closely, knowing that trouble could rise at any moment. There were sheriffs in some towns, but one man with a badge could not control hundreds of restless people. Judges were far away, and prisons were almost impossible to maintain. Holding someone for weeks or months cost money and resources that towns did not have. Because of this, justice had to be fast, very fast, and when justice is rushed, it often becomes harsh. Most people in these towns believed that fear was the best way to keep order. If someone broke the rules, the punishment needed to be strong enough to stop others from doing the same. It was not about kindness or second chances. It was about sending a message. The people believed that if crime looked costly enough, fewer would dare to try it. The story follows one such town resting on the edge of the frontier. It was dusty, loud, and always tense. Children were warned not to wander alone. Shop owners locked their doors early. At night, lamps flickered in the wind and shadows stretched across the streets. Everyone knew that once the sun went down, danger felt closer. The town had no proper court building. When disputes happened, people gathered in open spaces or inside the largest building available. Decisions were made by a small group of men, sometimes town leaders, sometimes just the loudest voices in the crowd. There were no written laws posted on walls. Instead, rules were passed through stories and warnings. Don't steal. Don't cheat. Don't cause trouble. What happened if someone broke those rules was known by everyone, even if it was never spoken out loud. Newcomers learned quickly that this place was not gentle. A single mistake could follow a person forever. Reputation mattered more than truth. If someone was accused, defending oneself was not easy. Proof was not always required. What mattered most was whether the town believed you were a threat. Fear shaped daily life. Parents taught their children to obey not just rules but people. Travelers stayed quiet. Workers kept their heads down. Everyone understood that standing out could be dangerous. In this land, blending in was a form of protection. The idea of fairness was different here. Back east, people spoke of laws, rights, and proper trials. In the West, people spoke of order and survival. Many believed that harsh discipline was necessary. They told themselves it was the only way to keep peace in such a wild place, and over time these beliefs became normal. Punishments were not hidden, they were meant to be seen. When something happened, the whole town often knew about it within hours. People gathered, whispered, and waited. Some felt nervous, others felt curious. A few even felt satisfied, believing that seeing consequences made the town safer. The town leaders believed that public discipline kept people in line. If one person suffered, others would learn. That thinking shaped how the town handled problems. Quiet solutions were rare. Private discussions almost never happened. Everything was open, loud, and final. Not everyone agreed with this way of life, but disagreement was dangerous. Speaking against the crowd could quickly turn attention toward you. So many people stayed silent, even when they felt uncomfortable. Silence became a survival skill. As time passed, these methods became part of the town's identity. Visitors heard stories before they even arrived. Some were warned to behave. Others were warned not to come at all. The town became known as a place where rules were strict and mercy was rare. Yet behind the tough appearance, many people were simply afraid. They feared losing control. They feared chaos. They feared that without strong actions, everything they had built would fall apart. The West was already unpredictable. Storms, shortages, accidents, and conflicts were common. People believed they could not afford weakness. The story shows how ordinary people slowly accepted extreme measures as normal. What once shocked them soon felt routine. What once caused discomfort became expected. Fear changed their sense of right and wrong. A man who arrived in the town one spring noticed this shift immediately. He had lived in other places, seen other ways of handling problems. At first, he thought the town was simply strict. But as weeks passed, he realized something deeper was happening. Rules were not enforced with balance. They were enforced with pressure. He noticed how quickly people judged others, how rumors became facts, how once a person was labeled a troublemaker, that label never faded. The town did not forget, and it rarely forgave. The man watched as people avoided certain names, certain homes, certain faces. He learned that fear had created invisible lines. Cross the wrong line and there was no way back. Children grew up seeing these moments. They learned early what happened to those who did not follow expectations. Lessons were not taught through calm explanation but through examples, and those examples stayed with them for life. As the town grew, so did its reputation. Some believed this harsh approach kept crime low. Others believed it only hid deeper problems. But no one could deny that the system shaped everyone who lived there. By the end of this first part of the story, one thing becomes clear. The Wild West was not only shaped by open land and opportunity, but also by fear and urgency. Without strong institutions, people created their own methods. And once those methods took root, they were hard to change. This land promised freedom, but it demanded obedience. And in that contradiction, a harsh form of justice was born, one that would leave marks not just on those who faced punishment, but on the entire community that allowed it to exist. As time went on, the town's idea of order became stricter. Rules were no longer just about safety. They became tools of control. People believed that strong action was the only way to keep peace in a place where danger always felt close. Because of this belief, punishment became something the town relied on heavily, almost like a warning sign posted for everyone to see. When someone was accused of wrongdoing, the process moved quickly. There were no long discussions or careful reviews. People gathered, listened to the accusation, and formed opinions within minutes. Once the crowd leaned in one direction, it was almost impossible to turn it back. Fear and emotion spoke louder than reason. The town believed that certain actions deserved especially harsh responses. Stealing, for example, was seen as a serious threat. Supplies were limited, and many families struggled just to get by. If someone took what did not belong to them, it was viewed as an attack on the whole community. Even a small theft could lead to a life-changing consequence. There were no quiet warnings or gentle lessons. The town wanted examples. They believed that if one person paid a heavy price, others would think twice before making the same mistake. Punishment was not meant to fix behavior. It was meant to scare people into obedience. People spoke of discipline as if it were a duty. They told themselves it was necessary, even fair. But behind closed doors, some felt uneasy. They noticed how quickly punishment became extreme and how rarely anyone asked whether the accusation was true. Still, they remained silent. Speaking out felt too risky. Those who carried out punishment were often ordinary townspeople. They were not trained officials. They were shop owners, workers, and neighbors. This made everything more complicated. Personal feelings sometimes mixed with judgment. Old arguments, jealousy, or past conflicts could quietly influence decisions. The man who had arrived earlier continued to observe. He noticed how easily people accepted punishment as part of daily life. Conversations in the town often included reminders of past examples. Parents warned children using stories of what happened to those who disobeyed. Fear was passed down like advice. He saw how punishment did not always match the mistake. Some people were treated harshly for small actions, while others were forgiven because they were popular or well-connected. This inconsistency made the system even more dangerous. It taught people that safety depended not on behavior, but on reputation. Newcomers were especially vulnerable. Without friends or history in the town, they had no protection. If accused, they stood alone. The town trusted familiar faces more than truth. Being unknown was enough to raise suspicion. People learned to watch their words carefully. A careless comment could be misunderstood. A disagreement could turn into an accusation. The town slowly became quieter, not because it was peaceful, but because people were afraid to speak. Workplaces followed the same pattern. Bosses ruled strictly. Mistakes were not treated as chances to learn, but as signs of weakness. The fear of punishment pushed people to work harder, but it also drained them. Tension filled the air, even during ordinary days. The town's leaders believed they were protecting order. They told themselves that without strong discipline, chaos would return. They remembered earlier days when fights were common and crime was frequent. To them, harsh action seemed like proof of progress, but not everyone agreed. Some older residents remembered a time when problems were handled with conversation instead of crowds. They noticed how the town had changed. What once felt like protection now felt like pressure. The man noticed these quiet disagreements. He saw the looks exchanged between people who felt uncomfortable but dared not speak. Fear kept them apart. Each person believed they were alone in their doubts. Punishment also began to shape identity. Once someone was marked as a troublemaker, that label followed them everywhere. Jobs became hard to find. Neighbors avoided them. Even if they tried to change, the town refused to forget. The punishment never truly ended. Children grew up watching this. They learned early that mistakes were dangerous. Instead of curiosity, they learned caution. Instead of honesty, they learned silence. The lessons they absorbed were not written in books but lived in daily experience. The town's justice was fast, but it was also shallow. There was little interest in understanding why someone made a mistake. Hardship, hunger, or confusion were ignored. Only the action mattered, not the reason behind it. This way of thinking made the town feel strong on the surface, but fragile underneath. Problems were not solved, only pushed down. Anger, resentment, and fear continued to grow quietly. Travelers passing through often sensed the tension. They noticed how people avoided eye contact, how conversations stopped when strangers approached. Some chose not to stay long. Others left with uneasy stories to tell. The man began to wonder how long such a system could last. Fear could control people, but it could not build trust. And without trust, a community slowly weakens. One evening, he watched as the town gathered again for another accusation. He saw familiar faces, all standing in the same places, following the same routine. No one questioned the process. No one slowed it down. It had become habit. He realized then that punishment had become part of the town's identity. It was no longer just a response to problems. It was a symbol of authority, a reminder of who held power and who did not. The most troubling part was how normal it all seemed. People spoke of it casually, like weather or work. The seriousness was lost. Compassion faded quietly, without anyone noticing when it disappeared. By the end of this part of the story, it becomes clear that punishment in the Wild West was not just about stopping wrongdoing. It was about control, fear, and survival. The town believed it needed these harsh measures to stay alive. But in doing so, it began to lose something important, its sense of fairness. And once fairness fades, even order becomes dangerous. The town continued forward, convinced it was doing what was necessary. Yet beneath the surface, tension grew. And the cost of these choices would not remain hidden forever. Over time, the town's way of handling problems became something people expected rather than questioned. When an accusation surfaced, everyone already knew what would happen next. It followed a pattern that had been repeated so many times that it felt almost automatic. People gathered, whispers spread, and decisions formed before anyone stopped to think. What made these moments powerful was not just the punishment itself, but the way the town turned it into a shared experience. Everyone was meant to see it. Everyone was meant to remember it. The lesson was not delivered quietly. It was displayed, repeated, and passed along through stories. The man noticed how these events drew people together in strange ways. Some came out of fear, others out of curiosity. A few came because they believed it was their duty. Children stood beside adults, learning lessons no one explained aloud. Even those who felt uncomfortable still showed up, worried that staying away might make them seem suspicious. The town square became the center of attention during these moments. It was where announcements were made, where decisions were revealed, and where the town showed its strength. The setting itself added weight to everything. Standing there, surrounded by familiar faces, made it hard for anyone to speak differently or think independently. The crowd played a powerful role. Once people gathered, emotions spread quickly. A single strong voice could guide the mood. Agreement grew louder than doubt. Silence felt safer than disagreement. In this environment, fairness struggled to survive. The man observed how people behaved differently in crowds. Alone, some were thoughtful and kind. In groups, they became distant and firm. Responsibility seemed to disappear as it spread among many. No one felt fully accountable because everyone believed they were only one part of the whole. Stories began to grow larger than reality. Each event was retold again and again, changing slightly each time. Details were added, motives were guessed, and assumptions became facts. Over time, the original truth mattered less than the message the story carried. The town leaders understood this power. They did not need to explain rules often. Stories did the work for them. A single example could influence behavior for years. Fear lasted longer than words. Public moments also brought a strange sense of unity. People felt connected by shared memory, even if that memory was uncomfortable. It became part of the town's identity. Outsiders were warned about it. Residents spoke of it quietly, sometimes with pride, sometimes with regret. The man noticed how people reacted afterward. Some returned to their daily routines quickly, as if nothing had happened. Others carried the weight longer, their faces serious, their voices low, but no one spoke openly about their feelings. Reflection happened privately, if at all. For those who were accused, the experience left deep marks. Even if they stayed in town, life was never the same. Conversations stopped when they entered a room. Opportunities disappeared. The punishment followed them in ways no one acknowledged openly. This public approach taught the town that shame could be as powerful as fear. Being seen, being judged, and being remembered became tools of control. Privacy disappeared in moments that mattered most. The man wondered if people understood how much this affected them. He saw how children copied what they observed. They learned to judge quickly, to follow the group, and to avoid standing out. These lessons shaped who they would become. Some residents believed this system kept the town safe. They pointed to the quiet streets and fewer visible problems. But the man noticed something else. The quiet did not feel peaceful. It felt tense, like everyone was holding their breath. People avoided discussing disagreements. Problems were ignored until they grew too large to hide. When they finally surfaced, the response was extreme. Balance was missing. Everything swung between silence and intensity. Travelers who stayed long enough noticed the pattern. They sensed the pressure beneath the surface. Some tried to speak kindly or suggest calmer ways to handle issues. Their ideas were politely dismissed. "This is how we do things here," they were told. The town trusted its methods because they were familiar. Changing them felt risky. What if softer approaches led to disorder? What if questioning the system caused it to collapse? Fear of the unknown kept the old ways in place. The man began to see how the system protected itself. Anyone who questioned it risked becoming part of the next story. This kept criticism quiet and rare. The system did not need force to survive, it used fear and habit. Even the leaders were shaped by this environment. They believed they were doing the right thing. They measured success by control, not compassion. They told themselves that tough decisions saved the town from worse outcomes. But control has a cost. Trust slowly faded. People relied on rules instead of relationships. Neighbors watched each other instead of helping each other. Community became something fragile. The man thought about how justice could look different. He remembered places where people listened before judging, where mistakes were met with guidance instead of public pressure. Those memories felt distant here. One afternoon, he noticed a small moment that revealed a lot. A child dropped something that did not belong to them. Instead of returning it immediately, the child froze, eyes wide, looking around in fear. The reaction was not about the mistake, it was about the consequences they had learned to expect. That moment stayed with the man. It showed how deeply the system had reached. Fear was no longer just a response to punishment. It had become part of everyday thinking. The town continued to rely on public examples. Each one reinforced the next. Over time, people stopped questioning whether the approach was right. They only asked whether it was effective. But effectiveness is not the same as fairness. And fairness, once lost, is difficult to recover. As this part of the story comes to a close, it becomes clear that the town's public way of enforcing rules shaped more than behavior. It shaped hearts, minds, and relationships. The cost was quiet but heavy. The Wild West was often described as bold and free. But in this town, freedom was limited by fear, and the lessons taught in public moments would follow everyone long after the crowd had gone home. As the years passed, the town's strict system began to show cracks. On the surface, everything looked controlled. The streets were quiet and rules were followed. But beneath that calm appearance, something was changing. Fear had done its job for a long time, but it had also created distance between people. Neighbors no longer trusted one another the way they once had. The man who had been observing the town for so long noticed this shift clearly. People smiled less. Conversations were shorter. Help was offered carefully, if at all. Everyone worried that kindness might be misunderstood or that association with the wrong person could bring trouble. The town's leaders still believed they were protecting order. But their actions were becoming more severe, not because problems were growing, but because they feared losing control. Any challenge to their authority felt dangerous. Even small disagreements were treated as serious threats. Punishment, once used to stop wrongdoing, slowly turned into a way to silence questions. People learned that speaking up was risky. Suggesting change could make someone stand out, and standing out was never safe. So concerns were swallowed and doubts remained hidden. The man saw how easily fear could change people. Those who once showed empathy now looked away. Those who once questioned decisions now agreed without thought. It was not because they believed deeply in the system, but because resisting it felt too costly. Some people began leaving the town quietly. They packed their belongings and disappeared before sunrise. No announcements were made. Their absence was noticed but never discussed. It was easier to say nothing than to ask why someone would leave a place that claimed to be orderly and safe. Those who stayed felt trapped by routine. Life became predictable but empty. Work, meals, sleep, repeat. Joy was rare. Laughter sounded cautious. Even celebrations felt restrained, as if happiness itself needed permission. The town system also began to affect the wrong people. Accusations became less about actions and more about differences. Those who looked different, spoke differently, or lived differently drew attention. Being unfamiliar was enough to raise concern. The man noticed how easily assumptions replaced facts. People stopped asking questions. They trusted rumors because rumors felt safer than uncertainty. Truth required effort, and effort required courage. One day, a disagreement between two neighbors grew larger than it should have. It started as a small issue, something that could have been solved with conversation. But instead of talking, fear took over. Others became involved. Sides formed. Voices grew firm. The situation did not need strong action, but the town responded as it always had, quickly and publicly. The goal was not understanding, it was control. And once again, the crowd followed the familiar path. Afterward, the man noticed how uneasy people seemed. Some avoided eye contact. Others acted as if nothing had happened. The pattern continued, but the comfort people once felt in certainty was gone. Doubt had entered quietly. Even the leaders felt the weight of their choices. They told themselves they were doing what was necessary, but late at night, some wondered if things had gone too far. Still, none of them knew how to step back without losing authority. The system had grown larger than any single person. It no longer served the people served it. Children growing up in this environment struggled in ways no one talked about. They followed rules, but they lacked trust. They obeyed, but they did not understand why. Curiosity faded. Creativity felt dangerous. The future felt narrow. The man often thought about what kind of adults these children would become. Would they repeat the same patterns? Would fear guide their decisions as well? Or would they one day question what they had been taught? A few brave individuals tried small acts of change. A kind word offered quietly. A disagreement resolved in private. These moments were rare and fragile. They had to be careful not to draw attention. The man saw hope in these small actions. They showed that not everyone had fully accepted fear as the only way, but hope alone was not enough. The system remained strong, supported by habit and silence. Over time, the town's reputation began to shift. Outsiders still knew it as strict, but they also began to see it as unwelcoming. Trade slowed. Travelers passed through without stopping. Opportunity faded quietly. The leaders blamed the outside world. They said others did not understand their ways. They said softness elsewhere had caused trouble, but deep down, some knew the truth. Fear had protected the town for a while, but it was now holding it back. The man realized that the greatest harm was not in any single moment of punishment, but in what those moments had done to the town's spirit. People no longer believed in each other. They believed only in rules and consequences. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. And without trust, even order feels empty. As this part of the story comes to an end, the town stands at a quiet turning point. The old ways still rule, but their strength is fading. The cost of fear is becoming visible, not in loud chaos, but in silence, distance, and loss. The Wild West was meant to be a place of opportunity. But in this town, opportunity had slowly been replaced by caution. And the question remained unanswered. Could the town change, or would it remain trapped by the system it had created? Time continued to move forward, whether the town was ready or not. Seasons changed, people aged, and the world beyond the frontier slowly grew more organized. Rail lines stretched farther, bringing news, ideas, and different ways of living. Even this isolated town could not remain untouched forever. The man who had watched the town for so long felt that change approaching. He saw it in small moments, a pause before judgment, a question asked quietly, a look of hesitation where there once had been certainty. Fear was still present, but it no longer ruled every thought as strongly as before. The town's leaders also sensed the shift. Their authority remained, but it felt heavier now. They had spent years enforcing order through strict methods, believing it was the only way. But as the town grew calmer on the surface and emptier inside, doubts became harder to ignore. One evening, a meeting was called, not because of an accusation, but because of concern. That alone marked a difference. People gathered with caution, unsure of what would be said. The air felt tense but also curious. For the first time in many years, the discussion did not center on punishment. Instead, people spoke about the town itself, trade slowing, families leaving, children growing quiet. The words were careful but honest. At first, no one mentioned fear. It was too close, too personal. But as the conversation continued, someone finally spoke it out loud, not as an accusation but as an observation. The room grew still. No one argued. That silence said more than any speech could. The man listened closely. He realized that many had felt the same way for a long time. They had simply never believed it was safe to say so. Fear had kept them apart, but shared experience was slowly bringing them together again. Change did not happen overnight. Old habits are hard to break, especially when they once felt necessary. Some resisted the idea of doing things differently. They worried that easing control would invite chaos. Those fears were real, shaped by years of living on edge. But others began to imagine a different path, one where mistakes were met with guidance, where disagreements were handled through conversation, where the town could be strong without being harsh. Small steps followed. Disputes were settled privately when possible. Accusations were questioned more carefully. People began to listen, even when it felt uncomfortable. These moments were fragile but meaningful. The man noticed how people responded. Faces softened. Voices grew calmer. Trust did not return all at once, but it began to show itself in simple ways. A neighbor helping another without fear of misunderstanding. A child speaking freely without glancing over their shoulder. The town was changing, not because of outside force, but because its people were ready. They had lived with fear long enough to understand its limits. They had seen what it could control and what it could destroy. The leaders, too, adapted slowly. They learned that authority did not have to rely on fear alone. Respect could be earned through fairness. Order could exist alongside understanding. Not everyone stayed. Some had already left, unable to wait for change. Their absence remained part of the town's story, a quiet reminder of what had been lost. But those who remained worked to build something better. The past was not forgotten. It could not be erased. Instead, it became a lesson, a reminder of what happens when fear replaces trust. Children growing up during this time experienced a different environment. They still learned rules, but they also learned reasons. They were allowed to ask questions. Curiosity slowly returned. The man, now older, felt a sense of peace watching this shift. He knew the town would never be perfect. No place ever is. But it was learning, and that mattered. Stories of the town changed as well. Travelers still heard about its strict past, but they also heard about its effort to grow. Some stopped to stay. Trade slowly returned. Life felt fuller. The Wild West itself was changing too. As laws became clearer and systems stronger, towns like this one no longer had to rely solely on fear to survive. Structure brought balance, and balance brought room for compassion. In time, the harsh practices of the past faded into memory. People spoke of them quietly, often with regret. They understood now that survival had shaped those choices, but it did not excuse them. The town's greatest lesson was not about strength or control, but about humanity. Order without understanding creates silence, not peace. Fear can stop actions, but it cannot build a community. As the story comes to an end, the town stands as a reflection of the Wild West itself, a place of hardship and hope, of mistakes and learning, of people doing their best in uncertain times. The land remained wide and open. The future remained unknown. But this time, the town faced it not with fear alone, but with a growing sense of trust. And that made all the difference.